you talked about the criticality of that business owner being able to extract themselves from the business. So in that context, what do you advise them in terms of timing, or when do you kind of actively getting involved in pushing them towards that, building that transition, enabling the rest of their team, et cetera, et cetera? What's kind of the timing factor for you?
That's a really good question, because there's our ideal agenda and then there's the client's agenda. So, oftentimes we start with the conversation, when do you think or you intend to exit? And, a lot of people will come to us and they'll say, I want to exit 3 years from now or 5 years from now. And we have to dig into what does that mean? So, for example, if they're not as familiar with the sale process, depending on how they structured the company, what is the transition period at the end of that time frame that's going to be asked of them to stay on? So, for example, if the company's in high growth mode, but the owner has a lot of the reliance on themselves, they have a lot of the IP, the knowledge is just with them, if the transition period is going to take any amount of time, they may be asked to stay on for 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 years. We just had 2 transactions close in December where they were tech and software companies, and the owner stayed on for 5 years. That was the term of the agreement that was tied into the deal. So if someone is thinking about selling and they say, 5 years, well, what does that actually mean? Because it's recommended that you plan for the sale, the actual sale transaction piece to be 12 to 18 months. So of that 5 years, the actual on the market piece is 12 to 18 months. The transition period where you may be asked to stay is 1 to 3 years, 3 years on average. And that's 4 years right now. So, we start by framing the context of this timeline. If they still feel like I want to build maximum value and then I'll start that process, the more that you can pull yourself out of the company, the shorter the transition period at the end of the process can be. So it's kind of, the less preparation you do to pull yourself out, the more may be asked of you to stay on, or you may take a haircut on the price because it's a higher risk if you don't stay on. And so there are some other factors at play here. Sometimes, if someone has more urgency to leave the company and they don't have the runway to do the work and pull themselves out of the company, then, it may get tacked onto the transition in terms of a consulting agreement, or it may get, they may take that cut on price. If they do have time to prepare themselves and pull themselves out of the company, you have to think of those other things. If there is a cost to bring on another employee, how is that going to reflect on the financials when that is a new expense that's going to be reflected next year? Or what is the history? What is the implication of that decision? We just had this happen with a business owner out of the Vancouver area, and he has some staff that could potentially take over the business. He looked at hiring for his successor. He chose not to. He's brought his current employees up to be. He's given them a promotion. So these things take time to put in place, and he's done a good job of delegating his roles within the last 12 months, but he's still got some ways to go. So to answer your question, to come back to your original question, ideally it's more than 3 years, that succession piece to hire someone externally to come in and train or to bring employees up through the ranks. It takes some time. And even if you end up hiring from outside and it's the wrong person for the job and you have to go back and rehire for that position, you've set yourself back sometimes. So it's really important to understand, am I selling this company at 65 when I'm ready to get out, or am I selling it when it's most appropriate for the business and I'm going to get maximum value? And what is the decision-making factor for when you're going to take that company to market? I hope that makes sense.
Great points.
Oh, absolutely fabulous. Now, a couple of things that came up in my mind when you were talking about that was, rather than focus on when you want to leave the business and plan that way, shouldn't you maybe reposition or create the paradigm of, okay, let's work from when you're gone backwards? so that we have a better time frame that we can work with, and you can actually help them understand better what the implications of that are. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think like a lot of the work that we do as exit planners, and I strongly believe that there should be more exit planners out there, and I think it's becoming a more practiced profession in Canada. We're a little bit late following Australia and the UK and the United States, but it's becoming a more dominant practice in Canada. And I think a lot of the work that we do also when we're starting to step that owner back is reverse engineer the mindset. And sometimes we're reverse engineering some of their operations that they've built in the company. But yeah, is walking them step by step out of their job, essentially, without firing yourself. It's not cold turkey, but understanding that, how is someone else going to completely operate this company without you someday? And if you can practice that while you're still owning it, you're in the best position possible. One of the exercises that we've run in classes before is, we get everyone to raise their hand and say, how many of you can leave your company comfortably on vacation? Everybody puts up their hand. Oh, I can take vacation. And we say, well, how many of you can leave? Yeah, for more than a week. And then, the hands start to go down. More than 2 weeks, more than a month, more than 2 months. And we did this exercise once and we got to 6 months and one person out of like 20 still had their hand up.
Yep.
And we went, that's what everybody's aiming toward.
There's a sellable
Everyone in
business.
this room needs to aim toward that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, many business owners don't think about when they say, I can take a vacation. Many business owners don't think about, okay, well, who's going to take care of payroll? Who's going to pay the bills? Who's signing the checks while I'm away? Who's going to talk to the lawyer or the accountant if something comes up in the meantime? They don't think of those types of things when you ask them that question until reality hits and says, hang on, I can't really do that. Right?
Yeah.
It's a bit of an eye opener.
I take vacation all the time. Yeah. But leaving. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it was funny because. Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
Well, are they taking vacation? Or are they actually turning their phone off, or are they still checking emails and managing tasks?
Well, it was interesting because my old partner, and I, and a fellow shareholder in my last business, we got to the point where he could actually. It was difficult for him to do, but he would take mini vacations. Like he'd go out for 4 days at a time and then come back 4 days at a time. And we finally had to tell him, no, you don't have to. And thankfully, we got to the point in the business that when he became ill and he was diagnosed with cancer and he was running around Canada and North America getting treatments that were experimental treatments, he was actually away for 6 and 8 weeks at a time. And it never impacted the business at all.
Wow. Yeah, that's a good business. And I think, when people get put in those health situations and it's forced upon them, it's amazing how fast some companies will react, but essentially you don't want that to happen upon a sale.
Yeah. Well, and in reality, if that does happen, if they even survive that in some cases, they're doing very well, right? Because many businesses can't survive an illness of the key player in the company.
Yeah, exactly. And I've heard a situation where that did happen and the gentleman became very ill and they weren't sure if he was going to make it. And the company scrambled to get everything in place and get their contingency plan in place. And they did well. And he came back to work eventually. And it helped him build that company to sell is putting him in that precarious situation, helped the company eventually sell.
Yeah.